Hi there. I'm pleased to present to you some ideas I've been researching as I complete my master's degree in counseling. The ideas today are directed towards people who are working with adolescents. Particularly, I will address clinical counselors, but the research and conclusions here can be applied in any setting or relationship that a youth worker type professional person has with a youth. This can be high school counselors, youth outreach workers, even hospital emergency staff who have adolescents admitted. I'll be speaking to you about the inevitable interaction and relationship you will have with your adolescent client's parent or parents. I use the word inevitable that describes a picture I have in my own mind from my own experiences. Imagine with me a scene from a movie that's almost always included in anything scary. You have your main character and the lights of their house are flickering. It's most likely a storm outside. Their face fills the screen, but in the background is a door frame. When the screen is dark, you focus hard on trying to see your main character's face. And then boom, the light flicks on, and in the framed backdrop, there's a shadowy figure. You can't make out who it is, but you know that the character is important, intimidating maybe. The lights go out and back on, and the shadowy figure doesn't appear again. That describes to me a picture of working with teenagers. I have over 25 years of experience working with adolescents in various contexts and capacities. My jobs have always been to help teenagers with problems. And it never fails that when I'm speaking with a youth about a complaint or a crisis even, one way or another, parents become the shadowy figure in the storyline of the distress. They're there, sometimes directly talked about, sometimes not. I'm sure it's the same for you. That question is, what do we do with that shadowy figure, that third party in the background? How do we respond to them? Why would we want to respond to them? I'm going to offer some simple ideas of why and how we'd engage with the shadow figures of our adolescent client's life, their parents. It seems that our work with adolescents happens in two ways, either through individual kind of hangout private sessions or in family therapy contexts with varying degrees of family involvement. Both approaches have pitfalls and messiness. I would argue that doing family counseling with a reluctant adolescent would be difficult to really hear the youth's perspective or feelings. Although family therapists will work with each member of a family, including the adolescent, they don't highlight the work with any one individual. They're more interested in the family system. But on the other end of the spectrum, doing adolescent counseling alone often doesn't connect the youth to their lived context. It doesn't have as good long-term outcomes and can even deepen barriers between youth and their parents. I think that both of these extremes can be mitigated by adopting a more flexible and individualized approach. And that's what I'm advocating for you today in your work with adolescents. Rather than rigid rules, I think that having just some foundational understanding and practical wisdom about family and adolescent development will serve your intuition really well if you're working with adolescents. I also need to just preface this discussion that I am using the term parents for brevity here, but please know that I'm including guardians, step-parents, foster parents, anybody who's responsible with and caring for a young person in the home of the young person that you're caring for as well. I have 3 ideas to support you as you engage adolescent clients and the inevitable relationship with parents. The first idea is to understand parents as stakeholders in your adolescent client's mental health. As in the corporate world, engagement with stakeholders is essential but will vary. Understanding stakeholders' expectations and attitudes is an essential piece to apparently making your business run smoothly. The same applies to the Therapeutic Alliance. These parental stakeholders need to be recognized and heard in order to subvert potential conflicts and understand your client better. Depending on parental capabilities, we can consider them as silent partners or active collaborators. Whatever portion the parent takes on while their young person is with you or in counseling, they are stakeholders. Parents are invested in their young person's health. As well, for obvious reasons, and particularly in a crisis situation with an adolescent, it is never more important to have had that relationship, your relationship with a parent, clarified and connected. The second idea is to recognize the context of your counseling relationship inside the larger picture of the adolescent's life. Imagine with me a youth in crisis, distress, sitting in your office, sitting with you. A recent loss has caused emotional upheaval, dysregulated feelings, maybe thoughts of suicide, and unfocused attention. Maybe your next appointment is coming in a few minutes, or the school that you're at is shutting down at 5 o'clock. An adolescent in a counseling room always returns to their family. Unless the adolescent client has non-traditional living arrangements, like maybe a group home, or there's been abuse and they do need to stay in a shelter, or they need to be admitted to the hospital, they return to their family relationships and that shared space. A therapist's presence or youth worker's presence is usually only a few hours a week, maybe even 1 hour every other week. A family's presence is most of the other hours. Relationship with parents is foundational piece to the existing structure of an adolescent's life, their struggles and their achievements. This relational system is the essential foundation your client, your teenage client needs when outside your care or your office, your school, wherever you're at. A great way to access what parental support looks like in your adolescent, student, or client's lived experience is by creating a simple relational map. Creating this kind of map is a way to assess the quality and functions of relationships the young person has with adults in their lives. As you discuss supportive adults, be curious about parents. You want to understand the quality of the relationship that they have with their parent. Of course, teenagers have many other opportunities to connect with great adults, like yourself. They usually go to school where they spend 6 hours a day. So school counselors, teachers, coaches, youth workers, youth pastors can and do have a profound impact and connection to your adolescent client. You want to know what those relationships are. These relationships should be recognized, but recognized as both impactful and limited, because those relationships, like yours, the counselor-youth relationship, are limited by time and professional boundaries. This leads us back again to acknowledging the context of counselor-youth relationship. It is a temporary, boundaried relationship. Helping the youth to identify parents or other caring adults as supportive will give them coping skills for the majority of hours that you are not there. Research tells us and experience that most adolescent clients coming in for mental health support feel isolated, misunderstood, and alone. We want to counteract that as much as possible by building up outside, consistent relational supports. As well, practical tip when discussing these other parents or adult connections is to use collaborative language, such as "we'll find a way forward" or "what a good team you have around you." This would impress upon the young person that there's other supports to be tapped into and that they're not alone in tackling their current problems that brought them to you in the first place. Highlighting caring adults and identifying ways those adults show up and show that they care is helpful. It's kind of like identifying the shadowy figure for the adolescent. You're telling them who's in the background of their life, there to support them. So, the third and final idea is to recognize the developmental phase of your teenage client. Remind yourself of the enormous changes that are happening. Sure, there are physical changes that we can see, but consider the multitude of invisible developments happening. Whew! The biggest change they are experiencing is that they are oscillating between dependency and autonomy with parental and adult relationships. The adolescent has complex, sometimes competing biological needs in that way. We can recognize that rapidly changing emotional atmosphere and make room for those conflicting behaviors. That's why most of us work with this age group, right? It's always changing and exciting. Youth are making a new kind of autonomy during this stage, an interdependent autonomy. A process that happens over years, remember, not hours. I want to encourage you to not underestimate the weight of the need for security in contrast to the drama and evolution of making autonomy. Detaching from parents, yet remaining connected to them, is necessary and exciting process. But we know if detachment happens prematurely, adolescents can lose essential supports, such as emotional support or financial, physical provision, and that creates a whole pile of problems and vulnerabilities. Keeping this developmental process in mind, I have 2 suggestions then to offer. The first is to question your assumptions. When you hear adolescents describe their struggles, it's easy to assume that parents are villains or deficient somehow. Well, it will be true that there are places parents are deficient and contributing to their young person's struggles. And at the same time, there are areas parents are attempting to connect and increase their abilities to parent well. But most likely, if you're like me and counsel an adolescent client away from their parents or hang out with them, you're never going to see or hear about those attempts. So with this in mind, be able to carry a nuanced understanding of the relationship your client has with their parent. Because undermining a parent's influence of relationship with their adolescent is only going to harm the young person in the long run. Although adolescent clients might believe themselves to be invincible, we understand that they're in a vulnerable position. They still need care as they navigate a road to adulthood. So my second suggestion is to acknowledge their vulnerability as not yet adults. Society has created and upholds many laws concerning protection for adolescents. We mirror society's values in this way, acknowledging potential areas of vulnerabilities. I've given you some ideas here of specific areas of concern for that group, but I'm sure you'll know of more. For instance, the potential for harm and manipulation in the adult-youth power imbalance. Or what about decision-making conversations when cognitive skills are still developing? All that brain science research should inform you and your dialogue with working with this population group. So, as you would for any vulnerable population, be sensitive and aware of those developmental unique needs that actually make them vulnerable. A quick review of the ideas. Understand parents as stakeholders. Know the context of your relationship, and then also recognize the developmental phase of your client. In conclusion, I want to leave you with a clear idea to help acknowledge your adolescent client's parents. The first idea is pretty simple, is just to meet with the parents. Take time, perhaps 5 minutes on a drop-off or a pickup, perhaps 30 minutes of a session if you're a counselor, to introduce yourself and promote the idea together of a collaborative journey. Be flexible as to what you feel is needed in that kind of conversation. A 13-year-old client may be different than what a 17-year-old client needs, and in ways that might be surprising to you. The next thing is that when you meet with parents, recognize the difficult journey that the parent has been on. They might have lost hope. They might be afraid and defensive. They might have made some terrible mistakes with their teenager. They may be negligent. Encourage them for showing up, compliment their efforts. Your only goal here is to build a little bit of rapport and gain some insight into the family context your client is living in. The next thing you have to do at the beginning, especially for clinical counselors here, is to outline confidentiality and privacy for all the stakeholders involved. That's an obvious beginning intake work. You're going to outline your legal obligations if you're called to disclose your record keeping. You're going to disclose if the client is suspected to harm themselves, right, or another person. You're going to have to break confidentiality if an elder or a child is being abused. So that's kind of the defined part of the conversation that you already know about. The next part of a conversation with a teenager and their parent is also necessary, and it can't be neglected. That's being clear what parents and the youth can expect in communication between now the three parties, often called tri-directional relationship: the therapist, the teenager, the parent. Explain what's going to be shared with parents. It will be what is only approved of by the youth, only if beneficial to the therapeutic process. Highlight that your primary client is the youth and their wishes will be respected foremost. Feel free to make suggestions that if they are needing supports themselves, it can be determined as the process unfolds. By doing that, you're not committing to counseling the parents yourself. That can be fluid and flexible, though, a decision for your own professional capabilities and assessment of the situation going forward. But just establishing that everybody at some point, parent or not, may or may not need mental health support, acknowledge that together. Next, after that initial meeting is behind you with the parent, reflect. Assess the needs of your adolescent client. Will their journey require regular updates or inclusion of some sort of the parent or not? For example, if the youth is self-harming, parents may already have an appropriate and helpful reaction to that behavior. Or it may be that the parent is contributing to the behavior, So they might need some education or to understand the behavior better. Maybe they need to have a helpful plan to react. Due to the developmental stage and situation of each client, assessing their needs in context to that relationship with their parent is the right thing to do, both ethically and for better outcomes over the long term. If you do decide how often you'd like to update or connect with a parent, always discuss the meetings with the youth prior to. With the youth's input, you can decide together what will not be shared and what will be shared. Is there a place maybe that they would like you to advocate for them? If parents want to discuss concerns or complaints, decide how that will happen, in what context and purpose. Always let the adolescent know those conversations have occurred or maybe are forthcoming. Resist triangulation. Be clear about that with parents. If you find parents are continually wanting input and support from you, it might be time to decide to switch into a more family-oriented approach or refer them on. Or if you're able to keep alliance with your youth while including parents in some meetings, do that. Be flexible as to what's going to serve your adolescent client and hear from them what they would prefer. Lastly, and this is for everybody, families who bring their teenagers for mental health support need your guidance. From a personal perspective of a parent of 4 kids, 2 of which are teenagers and a young adult, parents have no set plan to follow when their teenager is in distress. Parents have no set plan to follow when their teenager is in distress. Community supports, hospital emergency rooms, and even counseling agencies are really not easy to navigate for families with teenagers. So any guidance that you can offer is actually kind and potentially life-saving to the young person that you work with. Thanks for taking the time to meet with me. I trust that it was helpful for you, but moreover, I really hope it serves the young people that you meet with.